Hello, second graders. Nice to see you all here today for our third lesson of social studies in our unit on active citizenship. Today we will be talking about positive and negative consequences. Since we've already made our class rules, now it's time for us to think of some consequences for following those rules and some consequences for breaking those rules. First, let me ask you, what is a consequence? Could you turn and tell somebody that maybe is in the room with you what you think a consequence is? You could even just tell your stuffed animal or maybe your dog, what do you think a consequence is? If you said that a consequence is something bad that happens when you do something wrong, you think what a lot of people think. But in fact, a consequence could be something good or something bad. A consequence, you see, is a response to something that has happened. There are positive consequences and negative consequences. Can you guess which type of consequence is a good consequence and which type of consequence is a bad consequence? Thumbs up or down? Do you think a positive consequence is good or bad? Now thumbs up or down? Do you think a negative consequence is something good or bad? We're about to find out. So a positive consequence is the result of a positive action. It is when you do something good and then something good happens because of that. I bet you could guess what a negative consequence is. That's right, you guessed it. A negative consequence is the result of a negative action. So if you do something wrong, something not so nice might happen. You might have a negative consequence. Maybe you'll get in trouble with your parents, or maybe you'll get in trouble with your teacher, or it could even be just that you experience a natural negative consequence. Like, for instance, if I don't clean my room, a negative consequence that comes from that is my room is messy. And who wants a messy room? I have this book here. It's one of my favorites. It's called Miss Nelson is Missing. I want you to pay attention as I read this book. I want you to pay attention to the positive and negative consequences in this book. I'm going to make my face larger so that you could see the book better. Miss Nelson is Missing. It's written by Harry Allard and James Marshall. The kids in room 207 were misbehaving again. Spitballs stuck to the ceiling. Paper planes whizzed through the air. They were the worst behaved class in the whole school. Now settle down, said Miss Nelson in a sweet voice. But the class would not settle down. They whispered and giggled. They squirmed and made faces. They were even rude during story hour. And they always refused to do their lessons. Something will have to be done, said Miss Nelson. So stop and think right now. How are these children behaving? Do you think that they're following the class rules? Thumbs up, thumbs down. I bet your thumb is down. Mine's way down. They are certainly not following class rules. So do you think that they will have a positive consequence or a negative consequence? Say it out loud right now. I can't hear you. A little louder. Oh, you think they'll have a negative consequence? I'm thinking the same thing. That's a very good prediction. Let's find out. The next morning, Miss Nelson did not come to school. Wow, yelled the kids. Now we can really act up. They began to make more spitballs and paper planes. Today, let's just be terrible, they said. Not so fast, hissed an unpleasant voice. Uh-oh. This doesn't sound very good. Wonder who that is. Ooh. She doesn't look very nice, does she? A woman in an ugly black dress stood before them. I am your new teacher, Miss Viola Swamp. She rapped at the desk with her ruler. Where is Miss Nelson? Asked the kids. Never mind that, snapped Miss Swamp. Open those arithmetic books. Miss Nelson's kids did as they were told. Do you think that maybe Miss Viola Swamp came into the classroom as a negative consequence because all of those kids were misbehaving the way that they were? That's what I'm wondering. They could see that Miss Swamp was a real witch. She meant business. Right away, she put them to work, and she loaded them down with homework. Oh, look at all those books that they're carrying. Oh, my goodness. We'll have no story hour today, said Miss Swamp. Keep your mouth shut, said Miss Swamp. Sit perfectly still, said Miss Swamp. And if you misbehave, you'll be sorry, said Miss Swamp. Would you like to have Miss Swamp as your teacher? I know I certainly wouldn't. The kids in room 207 had never worked so hard. Days went by and there was no sign of Miss Nelson. The kids missed Miss Nelson. That's another negative consequence, right? So they really miss her. They misbehaved and she left. And now this mean teacher has taken over her class. Maybe we should try to find her, they said. Some of them went to the police. Detective McSmog was assigned to the case. He listened to their story. He scratched his chin. He said, I think Miss Nelson is missing. Detective McSmog would not be much help, clearly. There's Detective McSmog. Other kids went to Miss Nelson's house. The shades were tightly drawn, and no one answered the door. In fact, the only person they did see was the wicked Miss Viola Swamp coming up the street. If she sees us, she'll give us more homework. They got away just in time. Maybe something terrible happened to Miss Nelson. Maybe she was gobbled up by a shark, said one of the kids. But that didn't seem likely. They have quite the imagination, don't they? Oh, it says here, sharks, very unpleasant. Maybe Miss Nelson went to Mars, said another kid. But that didn't seem likely either. Yeah, they really do have great imaginations, these kids. Bet some of you have really great imaginations too. I know, exclaimed one know-it-all. Maybe Miss Nelson's car was carried off by a swarm of angry butterflies. But that was the least likely of all. Are you wondering what happened to Miss Nelson? I'm wondering that too. I don't think that she got carried off by a swarm of butterflies, though. The kids in room 207 became very discouraged. It seemed that Miss Nelson was never coming back, and they would be stuck with Miss Viola Swamp forever. They heard footsteps in the hall. Here comes the witch, they whispered. Hello, children, someone said in a sweet voice. Who do you think it is? Say it out loud right now. 1, 2, 3. Did you say Miss Nelson? I hope it's Miss Nelson. Let's see. Here they are. They just heard the sweet voice say hello. It was Miss Nelson. Oh, we were right. Thank goodness. Did you miss me? She asked. We certainly did, cried all the kids. Where were you? That's my little secret, said Miss Nelson. How about a story hour? Oh, yes, cried the kids. Miss Nelson noticed that during story hour, no one was rude or silly. What brought about this lovely change? She asked. That's our little secret, said the kids. Back home, Miss Nelson took off her coat and hung it in the closet, right next to an ugly black dress. When it was time for bed, she sang a little song. I'll never tell, she said to herself with a smile. Check this out. Do you see the black dress in the closet? So really, who was Miss Viola Swamp? Think about it. Here's Miss Nelson, and she has a black dress in her closet hanging up. It looks an awful lot like Miss Viola Swamp's, doesn't it? Do you think that Miss Nelson had dressed up as Miss Viola Swamp the whole time to teach her class a lesson? I think so too. And once the kids started behaving, sweet Miss Nelson returned to their class. So would you say that that was a positive consequence for behaving? That they got their sweet teacher back? Well, I promise I won't be doing that to you. But, but we'll be thinking of some other positive and negative consequences. Oh, wait, there's more. Last thing. There's a P.S. P.S. Detective Mick Smog is working on a new case. He is now looking for Miss Viola Swamp. Isn't that funny? I just love that story. Okay, I'm going to make myself smaller again. Here we go. Okay. Now we have some activities to do. Using Flipgrid, what I want you to do is I want you to make a video describing one time when you experienced a positive consequence and or a negative consequence. See if you could think of a situation, 2 different situations where you experienced a positive consequence and one where you experienced a negative consequence. If you're not able to think of both, share one, either a positive consequence or a negative consequence. And I want you to describe what did you do and what was the consequence. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to make one myself. Okay, so here we go. So I'm going to click here where it says record a response. Okay. Now it tells me that I'll have 1 minute and 30 seconds to record my video. Okay, so if I click anywhere, the video will start. So before I start my video, I want to do some thinking work. So let me think of a time that I experienced a positive consequence. Let me think. I remember when I was in second grade that I had this teacher, Mrs. Grad, and I remember I worked really hard in Mrs. Grad's class. I always paid attention. I always did all of my work. I was always very respectful. And guess what? As a positive consequence, Mrs. Grad made me student of the month. That's kind of like being the Harley Knight. It was such an exciting time for me. So that was definitely a big positive consequence. Now let me think of a time that I experienced a negative consequence. Oh, I know. I remember in third grade, I got in trouble. I remember that I was sitting next to my friend, and the two of us, we would talk all the time during class. And my teacher at the time, she had warned me. She said, Cindy, if you don't stop talking and start paying attention in class, I'm going to have to call home. And sure enough, I kept talking. I broke the class rules. I wasn't doing good listening. And she did call home, and I ended up being grounded. So that was a time that I experienced a negative consequence. So now let me make my video. Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Miller here. I'd like to share with you one time when I experienced a positive consequence. When I was in second grade, I worked really hard in class, and I always listened to my teacher, and I always did my very best work, and I was always kind and respectful. And guess what? My positive consequence was that my teacher, Mrs. Grad, made me the student of the month. That's sort of like being the Harley Knight of the month. It was very exciting for me, and it was definitely a positive consequence. Now, let me tell you about a time that I experienced a negative consequence. In third grade, I was sitting next to one of my good friends, and we would talk all the time during class. My teacher had told me, Cindy, if you don't stop talking and start listening, I'm going to have to call home. And sure enough, I didn't listen, and I kept talking to my friend. And my teacher, her name I think was Mrs. Soper, she called home, and I got in trouble. I was grounded. So that was a time that I experienced a negative consequence. Okay, so now I just clicked on that little red button again to stop my recording. And now I'm going to click next. Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Miller here. And I'd like to share with you one. I'm not going to. You could take a selfie. It says snap a picture to go along with your video. You will submit on the next step. So I'll click the picture again to take a selfie. I'll smile. And click next. And voila. It says do not close the app while we process and upload your video. So this video now will upload and everybody will be able to see what I said. So would you please pause the video and go ahead to Google Classroom where you'll find a link to the Flipgrid and make your video. And then you could come back and I'll tell you what we'll do next. See you in a few minutes. Good luck with your video. Welcome back, everyone. So as the last step for our lesson today, I'm going to need your help with something. We need to come up with some possible positive consequences and negative consequences for our virtual classroom. So in just a moment, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go to Jamboard, which also you can find in our Google Classroom under this assignment. And I would like you to share one positive consequence for following the rules in our virtual classroom and one negative consequence for breaking the rules. So let me show you how it will look. Okay. So when you go to Jamboard, you'll see this first screen here. It says, what could be a positive consequence for following the rules in our virtual classroom? I'm going to create a sticky note. Let's see. I think I'll make my sticky note green today. And let's see, a positive consequence. Well, one positive consequence would be that I do my best learning, right? If we're following all the rules, we're doing our best learning. That's certainly a natural positive consequence. So I do my best learning. Let's see, can I think of another positive consequence? I'll hit cancel to close this. Let me move it over. Oh, I forgot one thing. I want you to write your name. So before you start writing, please write your name so I can give you credit for the fabulous consequences that you're coming up with. Okay, so now it'll say, Mrs. Miller, I do my best learning. Let me think. Maybe I can think of another positive consequence. Maybe you could think of two also. Make another sticky note, and I'll write my name. Let's see. Maybe my teacher could let my parents know what a good job I'm doing. So let's see, my teacher, well, since I am the teacher, I'll just say the teacher. The teacher could let parents know. The parents know, that works. Okay, and then I'll click save. And then you just click cancel to close the next sticky note. I can move this over. Okay, so you can add your Post-its all around here. Now, there's another Jamboard here. So this one's for a positive consequence. If you go up here, you see this? This arrow, it says next frame. You'll click this and it goes to a new Post-it. And this says, what could be a negative consequence for, oh, this should say breaking the rules. Let me fix this now. I'm sorry. Okay, that's better. What could be a negative consequence for breaking the rules in our virtual classroom? Can you think of a negative consequence? Maybe I'll make this Post-it orange. Again, I'll start by writing my name, Mrs. Miller. Maybe a negative consequence would be, well, first of all, that I'm not doing my best learning. That's certainly a negative consequence. Can you think of something else too? Maybe a negative phone call to parents to let them know that their child is breaking the rules. A negative phone call to parents. That could be a negative consequence. Okay, now click cancel to close that. Move this over here. All right, so let's go back here. Okay, so after you have done your Post-its, you need to do one for a negative consequence and one for a positive consequence. That will conclude our social studies lesson for today. And in our next lesson, we'll be reviewing all of the vocabulary that we've learned throughout our last few lessons. So I look forward to doing that with you. Hope you all have a great day. Thanks for learning with me today. Bye-bye.